Justin Haley is expected to join Spire Motorsports in 2025. Corey LaJoie could be headed to Ware Racing in 2025. And Ryan Preece is expected to join expanding RFK Racing in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight on those really quickly. First, going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Todd Gillan's 2024 Boozy Jerky scheme that we'll see this weekend at Watkins Glen. Colors look really cool in my opinion. I think front rows had some good paint schemes. This one's no exception. I think it looks pretty good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Watkins Glen. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Mason Maggio's 2024 Ricky Rudd throwback scheme that we're going to see at Bristol next week. I like this a lot. I think Freddie Motorsports knocked this one out of the park. It's one of the best throwbacks I've seen so far this year throughout the year. It looks pretty awesome. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack next weekend at Bristol. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jackwood's 2024 Mongoose scheme that I believe we're going to see at Bristol. Color's okay in my opinion. This is not the greatest scheme I've ever seen. It's okay. Hopefully we could have a good run in this scheme though at Bristol. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ros Chasse's 2025 Busch Light scheme that we're going to see next year. This is one of the first 2025 schemes that have been released. If you notice, Worldwide Express is not on that car. There's been some additions to it. There's been rumor Worldwide Express may no longer be working with the team going forward. It's very interesting, but I think the 2025 Busch Light scheme looks pretty awesome and good, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Arbys. As it was announced earlier today that Arbys will sponsor Josh Bilicki at MBM Motorsports next weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway. This is going to be the first time that Arbys has sponsored a NASCAR car since I believe 2007 when they sponsored Roush. This is one of the most surprising combinations of teams and drivers I think I've ever seen, but it's really cool to see a small organization like MBM Motorsports, who's been working in the industry for many years. It's amazing to see that they're going to be working with Josh Bilicki and MBM. It'd be really cool for them to have the speed, I think, with how much money Arbys is probably going to be paying for this event. I imagine it could give them a little more pace and speed, and I think Josh is a pretty solid driver. It's a really good-looking car, too, nonetheless, and pretty exciting to see that Arbys will be sponsoring Josh Bilicki next weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Liquid Death. As there was a report by Adam Stern earlier today that Liquid Death is rolling out a new sweepstakes around its NASCAR deal where it will award $30,000 to 3 fans depending on what kind of car they release. These sweepstakes, from what I understand, are going to be coming to a close very, very soon. I think they'll come to a close probably at the end of the month or near the end of the season. And I think these 3 fans that end up getting it also have a chance and opportunity to go to a race later this year. I think it's a really great partnership, all things considered. Liquid Death is a really big brand that's been coming up over the last few years. I think it's pretty cool to see that Liquid Death will be growing their presence in NASCAR and will be doing a really awesome and cool sweepstakes. Really exciting stuff overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Watkins Glen purses. So every time you have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series race, Bob Pockets puts out the purse money for that event. And according to Bob, for the Cup race, it's $7,572,831. For the Xfinity race, it's $1,312,465. The Cup race got some pretty good purse money. Obviously, the charter teams will get a majority of that money. A couple of the open teams, which there's going to be 2 open teams at this event, will get a little bit of that money as well. If for Xfinity, that's not bad money. It's not amazing money by a stretch of imagination, but it's not bad money, all things considered. Nonetheless, it's good to see the purse money out. That will be increasing with the new charter agreement that goes into place next year, and the teams will be able to get a little more money going forward in 2025 as well. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bridgestone. As it was announced earlier today that Bridgestone has signed an extension as the official tire brand with IndyCar through 2030. Bridgestone has been the essential tire for IndyCar for a very, very long time. I believe since for the last 10 to 15 years, if I'm not mistaken, and it will continue their partnership going forward. Bridgestone's made some pretty solid tires, all things considered. They haven't had Goodyear's IndyCar. I think it'd be very interesting if Goodyear somehow in some shape or form got to work with IndyCar, but obviously their focus is going to be with IndyCar going forward, and of course Goodyear's focus will be with NASCAR. But of course, Bridgestone, I think, is kind of from the national area, if I remember correctly, so it's really exciting stuff for sure, and nonetheless, really happy and glad to see that Bridgestone has officially signed an extension with IndyCar. Really exciting stuff overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the NASCAR Championship race at Phoenix. As it was announced earlier today that the NASCAR Championship race at Phoenix has officially sold out. It's sold out in the grandstands, the camping, and the suites, and everything else. This is the latest that we have seen the championship race sold out. I remember last year, I think they sold out in June or July, and it's continued to get later and later of each year. I think a big reason for that is because fans are sick and tired of seeing basically the racing that we've seen at Phoenix for the championship. And I think fans are going to, at some point, it's going to get to the point where the championship race, if it continues to stay at Phoenix, I think at some point fans are going to be wanting that to move. There's a chance that Homestead could get it in 2026, and I think very quickly that is going to sell out. But honestly, I'm not surprised and shocked. It's good to see that the championship race sold out, but it's a little later than normal. It's been in July in the past, and we're in the middle of September, and it's crazy to think that it just finally sold out after waiting a long time. Really interesting overall. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Reed Atherton. As it was announced yesterday that Reed Atherton has been officially named the VP of Business Operations at Legacy Motor Club. Reed Atherton, for those who do not know, had worked previously at Circuit Americas, I believe, as a CEO, and also had worked at Arrow McLaren, who we're going to talk about here in the later portion of this episode. Now, Reed Atherton is going to be joining as the VP. We have seen a lot of hiring and reshuffling going on over at Legacy Motor Club in recent months. And honestly, I think at this point, if you're Legacy Motor Club, you got to stop hiring people and you need to focus on trying to build up your program. I get you're wanting to get everybody in position for 2025. You've changed your competition director many times. At some point, you've got to stop doing that and you got to focus on trying to make your team better. And I really hope going forward, especially for Eric Jones and John Hunter Nemechek's sake, and maybe Corey Haim's sake in the future, I really hope they can figure this out and stop adding a bunch of different people. If they can do that, I think it'd be really, really good. Hopefully they don't stop adding people, but with Reed's experience, I think he'll do a really good job helping grow when it comes to the business side of things, really being able to help grow the Legacy Motor Club organization. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Prima. As it was announced on Wednesday that Prima has officially announced their numbers for 2025 in IndyCar. The numbers are going to be 83 and 90. Prima formed in 1983. Of course, they'll be joining an IndyCar. They've been in the Formula ladder for many, many years. They've had a lot of great drivers part of their organization. While the drivers have not been announced for Prima, it's rumored that Callum Ilott and Robert Schwartzman are likely going to be the two drivers that end up over at this organization in 2025. Callum, I think, absolutely deserves it. There have been talk of Logan Sargent going over here for 2025, but it sounds like at this moment, but that's unlikely going to happen, unfortunately, which is kind of disappointing as I feel like that Logan Sargent coming IndyCar would be a very interesting move. But at the same token, same time, bringing Callum Ilott and Robert Schwartzman, two really good young drivers, I think it also does make a lot of sense. So I think it's a very interesting move for sure, and glad to see that Prima has officially announced their numbers for 2025. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Green. As it was officially announced yesterday that Austin Green will drive the 32 for Jordan Anderson Racing this weekend at Watkins Glen. Austin Green has made about 3 or 4 starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series so far this year, and honestly, every single road course race that he's ran so far this year, he's been very, very impressive. He's finished in the top 11 or 12, I believe, in every single race he's ran, and I believe he's had 3 top 10 finishes, including most recently, not long ago, where he got a top 5 at Sonoma. I think he could honestly have a chance to get a top 5 or top 10. Yes, there's a lot of really stout competition. Guys like Shane Van Gisbergen, William Byron, even Joey Logano. Guys like Sam Mayer, AJ Allmendinger, who are going to be really fast in the event. But I think Austin Green could take it to them. I think he's going to be very fast. I think he'll be super, super competitive. And I think he's going to have a really strong chance and opportunity to have a really solid, fantastic, and good run this weekend with Jordan Anderson Racing. I think it'll be pretty fast for sure this weekend at Watkins Glen. I expect him to be pretty quick. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mike Skeen. As it was announced earlier this evening that Mike Skeen will officially drive the 87 from Peterson Racing Group / Jordan Anderson Racing this weekend at Watkins Glen. The last time Mike Skeen competed in NASCAR's top 3 divisions, I believe, is 2018, when he competed, I believe, for JD Motorsports back in the 2018 season. Mike Skeen is famous for, I believe, his wife getting into a fight with Max Pappas back in 2013, but also has had a lot of of success in IMSA back in the day and in recent years as well in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. Mike Skeen's a pretty good road course racer, and unfortunately this car does have to qualify in, but they are going to have ECR engines. So I do actually think that Mike Skeen will have the pace and speed to potentially contend for a very, very solid performance. I could see him getting a top 20 or top 25, but like I mentioned with Austin Green, it is going to be a pretty competitive field. So I'm not expecting him to set the world on fire, but I do think Mike Skeen's got talent, and I do think he'll do a pretty good job for sure, as he does have quite a bit of experience racing at Watkins Glen in the past. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Watkins Glen. As Bob Poggers put out a tweet in regards to Watkins Glen, and he put out a tweet that they have removed the curbing down into the turn 5 or turn 6 area near the bus stop. Instead, they've added some new rumble strips in that area. When they did the repave around the racetrack not too long ago in that area of the track, they had added some curbing in that area. Eric Almirola had mentioned basically during media availabilities this week that he said that curbing was causing some headaches for the drivers, and Kyle Larson even put out a photo showing why they removed the curbing was because on his mouthpiece, they were getting like, I think 15 or 20 G's on Kyle Larson's mouthpiece, which is absolutely insane, and that's why they have removed the curbing. And honestly, seeing the rumble strips, it does not look that bad. I get the curbing did look pretty good, but if the drivers are having headaches among other things, especially with this next-gen car, I don't think it's a really bad decision to go ahead and remove it. I know some will disagree with me on that. That's fine and understandable, but I think getting rid of something that could hurt the drivers is not a bad thing. So hopefully this is a good decision, and hopefully it doesn't affect the racing. I certainly don't think it is going to affect the racing in a major way. I still think the racing is going to be about as good as it's been in the past. Hopefully the racing, though, can for sure be really good this weekend at Watkins Glen. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Padar Ward. As it was announced yesterday early morning that Padar Ward will officially have the opportunity to drive the MCL 38 in FP1 practice at Mexico City during the Mexican GP in Formula One. Padar Ward, while he competes full-time in IndyCar, he also is a backup driver and reserve driver for McLaren's Formula One program. A few years ago, Padar Ward had been in the F1 ladder and was looking to go into that ladder before making his way back over to IndyCar not too long ago. Padar Ward's dream has been to drive around the Mexico City racetrack. And like I mentioned, he is going to have a chance and opportunity to do that. And I certainly think he's going to be very fast. And I think this is such a great opportunity for McLaren to give him this shot. Even though Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris are not going anywhere anytime soon. But I think in the future, it'd be really awesome and fantastic for Padar Ward maybe a few years down the road. If he does well enough IndyCar, wins a championship down the road, maybe we see him get a chance and opportunity to maybe make some starts. And we know he's interested in racing in NASCAR, especially at the track next year. So he's going to have a one-up advantage on a lot of drivers that are running, considering he's probably going to be running either the Xfinity race or the Cup race there. So I think it's really exciting stuff for sure, and it's pretty great to see that Padar Ward will get the chance and opportunity to do FP1 practice at Mexico City in October. When the Cup Series Championships around that time, it's going to be cool to see him get the chance and opportunity to run and do a practice session there. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Martinsville. As it was reported by Bob Poggers last night, that Martinsville will have an option right side tire that will be the main tire that will be used. In addition to that, they will even have a softer left side tire that will be used during the Martinsville weekend. Well, I think a lot of people are going to look at this and say it's not a good move to bring some variable in. Honestly, with Martinsville in the next gen car, I really like this move. We saw how good the option tire was at Richmond. It created one of the most intriguing short track races we've seen in recent years. And having a softer left side tire, I think will make the racing even more interesting. I think it's going to make it a lot more fun and kind of bring back Martinsville to where it was years ago, back in 2021. The last time Martinsville had a really, really awesome and fantastic races all the way back in the late 2020 or the early 2020s and maybe the late 2010s as well, especially like 2018, 2017, that era where I think the Gen 6 put on some really great short track racing. If NASCAR can find a way to continue to make these inroads where they continue to make the racing better on short tracks, the better I think it's going to be for everybody. So I'm really happy about this nonetheless, and it's good to see that they're doing this. I think this is a great decision and fantastic to see that they're bringing a softer tire, which hopefully will make the racing a lot better. We go to Watkins Glen this weekend. On the Cup side, I think the Xfinity race is going to be a banger. Not Watkins Glen, excuse me, Martinsville. I think Xfinity is going to be a banger there, but hopefully the Cup race will be a banger as well, and it could put on a pretty fantastic and great show overall. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Santino Fuchi. As it was announced earlier today that Santino Fuchi has signed a multi-year contract extension with AJ Foyt Racing and will return to the number 14 car for AJ Foyt Racing in 2025. Santino's been driving for the last year or so with AJ Foyt Racing, and Santino has been very solid this year. I know some are going to be questioning, why would you bring Santino back? Well, let me put this in perspective. The last time a AJ Foyt Racing car finished in the top 10 in the standings was Ayrton Dare back in 2002. Santino Fuchi is currently in the top 10 in the standings and could potentially finish as high as 9th or 8th if he runs well enough. He's been really solid so far. You don't have to like Santino Fuchi as a person, but as a race car driver, you cannot deny that Santino is a very talented driver. And you're going to have two really good young drivers on this team. You're obviously going to have David Lucas, who's going to be part of this organization next year, and I believe the number 41 or the 4 car next year, probably the most likely the 41, is Stingray Robb isn't going to be back in this organization next year. But you're going to have two really good drivers who I think can both finish in the top 10. AJ Foyt's team is growing a lot in a big way, and it's really good to see that they're making a decision. I think this is the right call and right decision, especially when you look at the talent that they have over there. I think that Santino's done a really solid, fantastic, great job, and he absolutely 100% for sure deserves to be back with this organization and team for the 2025 season. I think he's going to play a major role in helping the team grow going into next year once again. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lee Diffie. Now, Lee Diffie, I believe, was on one of the Scene Vault podcasts, if I remember correctly, and there was a part 2 episode that came out. And apparently, Lee Diffie revealed some very interesting information. He says that he was actually going to be the voice on NASCAR TNT starting in 2010. However, an exec vetoed him because of his accent. Very interesting that an exec did that, and not the greatest move in my opinion. Considering that Lee Diffie is one of the best broadcasters for motorsports we've seen not just in recent years, but really the last 10 or 15 years. He's called some really incredible Indy 500s over the last 5 years especially. He had that really great call earlier this year. His call at Daytona earlier this year was phenomenal and incredible, and he's had some really good calls, especially during the Southern 500 as well, and I feel like he did a really good job most recently at Atlanta Motor Speedway. In fact, I would love to see him get the chance and opportunity to call more races going forward. But it's such an interesting thing to hear from how TNT, they went with Adam Alexander. And no disrespect to Adam Alexander, but Adam Alexander should not have been given the opportunity to call races back in 2010. Now, Adam Alexander has absolutely and desperately improved over the last 5-10 years, especially since getting over to Fox. When he went to Fox, I was like, oh God, here we go. But when he's done such an amazing job the last 10 years, to the point where it's very likely that he's going to be calling the Xfinity races for the group of the CW next year. I think Lee Diffie's done an amazing job, though. He's one of the best commentators we've seen. There's no disrespect to Mike Joy, but Lee Diffie's much better nowadays as well. And I think he's done a fantastic, great job the last 10, 15 years of motorsports. It's a shame he won't be calling IndyCar races, as IndyCar, of course, is going over to Fox next year. This will be the final IndyCar race on NBC. And I think I just really am glad to see, nonetheless, that he's part of the broadcast. It's a shame that TNT did this back in the day, but it doesn't surprise me or shock me. You had people that were making bad decisions over there, and it kind of led to TNT having lackluster coverage at points in times, and I think kind of led to a Monday product, especially after Bill Weber left. They were good at first, and they kind of fell off the corner after 2009 when they brought Adam Alexander in, though I will say Adam Alexander is a lot better now than he used to be back in the day. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Conor Zill. Now, we already talked about this on the channel a couple times, but this weekend, Conor Zill will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut this weekend at Watkins Glen, driving a number 88 car. We already know that Conor Zill is going full-time with Junior Motorsports in the 2025 season. Now, a lot of people are not expecting Conor Zill to be a major threat and contender to win. He's also doing double duty because, remember, later this afternoon, he'll be driving, I believe, the 28 car for Pinnacle Racing Group, where I think he has to be the favorite. I remember in his debut earlier last year where he had, I believe, a broken track bar or sway bar on that car, and he went on to go almost win the race before unfortunately getting dumped by Corey Heim at the end of the event, or Jesse Love, who got in the back of him and dropped him back quite a bit where he still finished in second. I've been really impressed with Conor's growth as a driver. I remember his debut in trucks where he had a tire go down, lost a lap, had broken parts in the car, and still ended up finishing fourth because he used his stuff up. I think Conor is going to be really exceptional in this race, and I think a lot of people are underestimating how good and how dangerous he's going to be on the racetrack. I expect Conor to be a major asset and a major contender for the win. He's going to make some other Xfinity starts later this year, and I expect to be very competitive there. I've already said he's going to win a few races in the NASCAR Cup Xfinity Series next year. I think he'll probably make some truck starts down the road as well, and I think he's going to do a very excellent, fantastic, great job this weekend in his debut. He's so talented. He always gets the best out of equipment. He's been really strong with Pinnacle this year in ARCA. I think he's going to, and he was pretty fast before he had the crash earlier this year at Richmond in trucks, where he was running top 10 in that race. I expect Conor to be very fast, and I think he'll be a pretty strong contender to potentially get the victory this weekend at the Glen, though he's going to have to beat Shane Van Gisbergen and William Byron and Ty Gibbs, and that's going to be very hard to do. But I'm excited to see what he can do. I think he will for sure be very competitive for sure this weekend at Watkins Glen Xfinity, and I do also expect later this afternoon he is going to win the ARCA race. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about 23XI racing once again. Now, earlier this week, Kevin Harvick was on his podcast that he does called the Happy Harvick Podcast. And he says that 23XI Racing not signing the new charter agreement he felt was very, very bizarre. He kind of went on to basically say that if you don't address this with your team and the people inside your team very, very soon, it's going to cause a lot of controversy going forward, and it's going to kind of cause a lot of stuff behind the scenes going forward. Obviously, 23XI Racing and Front Row are the two organizations that did not sign the charter agreement. Now, I think Front Row Motorsports more than likely is going to sign the charter extension and the charter agreement before 23XI Racing does. Some have suggested maybe 23XI Racing could go to court in the future. Honestly, I don't know if they're going to be able to hold up in court. I'm not a legal expert, by the way, but I don't know if they could take this to court and be able to win. Considering the fact that 13 of the 15 teams signed the charter agreement, I'm really not sure they're going to be able to win. And honestly, 23XI Racing has lost pretty much all their leverage, or most of their leverage. If not, they've already lost it at this point. I feel like 23XI, I understand what they want to do. They want to change the sport and kind of enter to a point where it's like an equity sharing thing. And I've seen a lot of people saying that 23XI Racing has a lot of leverage. I really don't think they have a lot of leverage, to be honest with you, considering, like I said, the 13 of the 15 teams have already gone ahead and signed the charter agreement at this point. I just don't think they're going to win. I do think there is a chance, though, like I've already mentioned, I do think there's a great chance and possibility that they're going to try to sue NASCAR. And like I've already kind of said, I just don't feel like they're going to have a chance and opportunity to win. I might be wrong, and they somehow find a way to win in court, but at that point, 23XI may not even be around at this point. And both Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace, who've been having really good years so far, may be free agents if things don't get better. Again, I still think near the future, probably NASCAR will play a way of giving them a little more money to kind of shut them up or something like that at this point. It's probably what they're going to do. I'm not on NASCAR side in this situation. I'm also not on the team situation because us fans do get affected by stuff like this, and it can definitely be very frustrating to watch this kind of stuff go down. So I really hope this stuff can get resolved with the other two teams so this doesn't continue in the playoffs. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be continuing, and Denny Hamlin this weekend at Watkins Glen is probably going to get asked about this kind of stuff, considering how big of a deal this is. I do think he's going to get asked about this, unfortunately, this weekend. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, earlier this week, I believe Kelly Crander from Racing.com put out an article in regards to drivers who did not make the playoffs in 2024 and how it's affected them. Kyle Busch had a very interesting comment about this. He says he has lost a ton of money. I'll just say that in the last few weeks because of not making the playoffs and also not winning races. Kyle Busch has struggled so far in the 2024 season. He hasn't picked up a victory, but in recent weeks, The A team has been a lot quicker and has been a lot faster. Kyle Busch has had 5 straight top 12 finishes and 4 straight top finishes and has been very close to winning, including getting 2 runner-up finishes, those coming at the Southern 500 and the prior week at Daytona, where had he gotten a better push from Christopher Bell, he goes on to get his first win of the year, and he's in the playoffs. Now, obviously, though, Kyle Busch is trying to build up momentum going into next year, but had Kyle Busch been able to make the playoffs, he said he would have had a lot more, because he says it's kind of nice to not have all this playoff media day and all this stuff that I have to go to, but he also said at the same time, if he'd been able to make the playoffs this year, it would have been a lot more money going into this pocket. And I think about this applies kind of something else too. Is there a performance clause in Kyle Busch's contract? Is it required for Kyle Busch to perform at a very high level? Now, we know Kyle Busch is expected, of course, to return to Richard Childress Racing in the 2025 season, and I wouldn't leave RCR at this point and go to another organization. I know that he'd been talking about maybe going to Hendrick Motorsports or going back to Joe Gibbs Racing at one point, but Joe Gibbs Racing is completely set, and we know for sure that Alex Bowman 100% is going to be back at Hendrick Motorsports next year, so there's really no rides up there available. Could he go to Spire? That could certainly be a possibility, but it doesn't sound like he's going to Spire either. I think he for sure for 1 year is going to likely stick it out with RCR. If the team just gets better and he starts competing for wins, because it's kind of like the opposite of last year. He started off really, really well, but then at the end of the year, they kind of had a big slump. This year, it's kind of the opposite. They started off kind of slow. They had a couple really good performances early in the year. Then they had that massive slump, but they've had a lot of speed. I go back to Brickyard 400 before he had that crash. He was running in the top 5 or top 6 area and was on the fringe of getting a top 5. At this point, I would stick around with RCR going forward. Again, could this mean Kyle Busch's future is uncertain? I don't think Kyle Busch's future is uncertain at this point, but going into next year, he's going to be 40 and he still wants to win before the end of the year. But for Kyle Busch fans like myself, I do think there's a really strong chance and a really great opportunity that he might end up winning before the end of the year. I want to see him get a win before the end of the year, to be honest. It'd be really good for the sport if he can get it done. I know that a lot of Kyle Busch haters probably don't want that to happen, but I think for a lot of us fans, it'd be really great to see Kyle Busch get it done. Kyle Busch has grown a massive fan base because I think a lot of us want to see him get a win and want to get it done. He's had 63 career wins up to this point. I think it'd be really cool for him to get a win, be a playoff spoiler at this point. I really hope he can get the chance and opportunity, and I do think he's going to get that opportunity to get a win before the end of the year. I've got this weekend circled. He's been really good at the road courses. I've got other races like Talladega circled. Remember, he won there last year. I do think Kyle Busch is going to have a really strong chance and a great opportunity to be competitive there, and I certainly think he'll have a really fast car and will be for sure a threat to go to victory lane before the end of this year, and hope we can use that momentum going into next season as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Parker Kligerman. Now, we already talked about this on the channel earlier today, but it was officially confirmed earlier this morning that Parker Kligerman will not be returning to Big Machine Racing full-time in 2025 in the number 48 car. In fact, he also confirmed today as well in a really interesting statement that he will also not be running full-time in NASCAR in 2025. Now, earlier today on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, Parker Kligerman did say that the reason he made a decision is he's been kind of laying on this for the last few months, has been wanting to make a decision for a very long time. We've been hearing Rick Allen when it comes to Xfinity broadcasts bringing up that Parker's future was very uncertain. Now, Parker Kligerman, in my opinion, has had a very solid year in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He's been pretty competitive, has been in the top 10 of the standings pretty much all season long, is in really good shape to make the playoffs, and honestly, if he runs well enough today at Watkins Glen or tomorrow at Watkins Glen, he's going to end up making it on points. But he's been very, very good this year at times, and one of the few drivers that's really at times able to keep up. He's had some good runs. Daytona finished third. Atlanta finished, I believe, in second. He's had some really good stand-up performances throughout the year. And you think about Parker Kligerman's career. Parker has had a very solid NASCAR Xfinity and truck career especially. I go back to how good he was in the truck series. He was a Penske development driver back in the day, drove for Brad Keselowski Racing back in those years, contended for wins with that organization, and then unfortunately got fired, I think, halfway through the 2012 season with the 2019, and went over to Red Horse Racing, and pretty much from the get-go, he got that win in the 7 truck with them at Talladega. That led to him having an opportunity with Kyle Busch Motorsports in the NASCAR Xfinity Series with Kyle Busch's team, and I think he was okay at that team, but wasn't great. Then he moved up to Cup with Swan Racing, and it wasn't great there. And then since that time, he's been either part-time or full-time in the lower series. Then 2017, he got that win at Henderson's, been part-time with that team for years. And then he got that win in the Truck Series in 2022 at Mid-Ohio, holding off a hard-charging Zane Smith. And it gave him that shot and opportunity to move up to a better organization like Big Machine Racing. I think he's been a really, really good career, and it sucks to see that he is retiring from full-time racing, but it sounds like he still will be part-time in 2025, which is good at least, because I want to see Kligerman be able to compete at least on a part-time basis. I guess Henderson Motorsports more than likely is going to want him back on a part-time basis, and they'll probably let him get a chance and opportunity to at least be part-time in the 2025 season. Maybe make some select starts in Infinity. Hey, Dale, if you run a part-time car, give Parker a chance, because I think he certainly could win for you. I also would have to imagine he's probably going to do some work in TV, probably still going to be working with NASCAR and NBC, or perhaps go to TNT or go to Amazon perhaps and work over there. That could certainly be a shout and a possibility as well. But Parker's had one of the greatest underdog stories in NASCAR in recent years, and it's sad to see him retire from full-time racing, but he's had a great career nonetheless, and I think he deserves a chance to retire if he wants to. Parker, congratulations on a fantastic career in NASCAR. Now, the big question is, who's taking over the 48 next year? I think this one's pretty much a no-brainer. I know some are probably going to say Zane Smith, probably guys like Harrison Burton. I don't think it's going to be any of those guys. I think the driver behind the wheels 48 car next year is Nick Sanchez. Nick Sanchez has had prior starts with Big Machine Racing back in the day, back in 2022. Had a few select starts with Big Machine Racing and honestly qualified pretty well. I remember in the early portion of that race at Phoenix where he was running inside the top 5. And honestly, he's been really good in the Truck Series, and I think he's absolutely ready to move up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He has a chance to win his first truck championship later this year. Has already picked up 2 truck wins this year, those going at Daytona and Charlotte. And I think realistically, if you move him up to the 48 car full time, I'm not expecting him to go out there and win a race, but I certainly do think that you're going to see Nick Sanchez be very fast, very strong, and very, very competitive. I think he will be pretty fast. I think he's going to have a really great chance to win some races. I think he's got a lot of raw speed and a lot of natural born talent, and he's going to be working with a lot of guys as well that are going to help. I also think Rev Racing is going to help in a big way. My question is who gets the 2 truck next year? Maybe we see Andres Perez move up to trucks full-time next year. That could certainly be a possibility. There's a rumor that I saw about Tyler Anchor maybe going to Spire. That's a rumor that's been going around, or Derek Kraus going to Spire, so that could certainly be a possibility. But I think Nick Sanchez moving up would be a no-brainer. But again, it does suck to see that Parker is retiring from full-time racing at the end of the year, but he's had a solid career in NASCAR, and I think he's earned the right to retire full-time racing if he wants to make that decision. So nonetheless, congratulations to Parker on a pretty solid career in NASCAR. Can't wait to see whatever he does going forward, and congratulations, like I said, on a pretty good career for Parker Kligerman in NASCAR. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about McLaren. Now, McLaren, Arrow McLaren, have been in the news all week. Obviously, we know Kyle Larson is going to be running his second Indianapolis 500, attempting it once again in the number 17 car. But they've obviously also been in the news because there's interest about Padar Ward maybe, just maybe, going to Mexico. But a couple days ago, Zach Brown, who is the owner of the Arrow McLaren organization and basically runs the McLaren operations over there, he kind of talked about what the future plans for McLaren are. He kind of expressed interest in maybe wanting to bring McLaren to NASCAR. And he says he would love to have another partnership maybe with Hendrick Motorsports. Could this mean some way we see Chase Elliott go run the Indy 500? That could certainly be a possibility. Or maybe Alex Bowman or William Byron get that chance. That could certainly be a possibility. But where McLaren found it interesting is they mentioned the Daytona 500. Zach Brown did say that his team is very interested. They said they would probably not go full-time in NASCAR, but they are interested in running the Daytona 500. Now, certainly McLaren, I don't believe they've been in NASCAR before, if I remember correctly, but it would be really cool to see a McLaren in the Daytona 500. Now, who would be the driver behind the wheel of this car if they were to go to NASCAR? Well, you got to look at Padar Ward. That's a pretty obvious one. Padar Ward is wanting to run NASCAR. We know he's interested in doing the Mexico City race, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But I do think that them getting Padar Ward to run the Daytona 500 would absolutely be huge. Could maybe they find a way to get Christian Lundgaard there? That could certainly be a possibility. Christian Lundgaard is joining their IndyCar program next year in the number 7 car. Probably maybe bringing Hy-Vee over next year. So that could certainly be a possibility. But I think it's years down the road. But you think about all these teams from the world of motorsports that have jumped into NASCAR in recent years. 2311 Racing. We know Andretti is also interested in coming to NASCAR. It's heavily linked that they're probably going to be working with Spire Motorsports going forward. And they've had interest from guys like Colton Herta who expressed interest in running to run the Daytona 500. I think you're seeing a lot more of this crossover going on because of the success of Kyle Larson. And yes, Larson, of course, did not go out there and have the success that I think he was truly looking for in the event. He wanted to win both races, the Coke 600, Indy 500 on the same day. But I think if you give the chance an opportunity, and I think Padar Ward being the guy, that'd make a lot of sense. But I think there's also a chance and possibility that we could be seeing a partnership for the Mexico City race. Obviously, like I already mentioned, there's talk about Zach Brown maybe giving him a chance to do an Xfinity Series start. And I think about the fact that we know that Junior Motorsports works at Hendrick Motorsports very, very closely. Junior has a really big association with Hendrick, and some of the drivers that currently drive for Hendrick Motorsports came through that Junior Motorsports pipeline. Chase Elliott, William Byron, two perfect examples, and technically Alex Bowman also, who was Dale Jr.'s replacement when he took over the 88 car in 2018. I think it'd be really awesome and fantastic to see something like this happen where Padar Ward gets to maybe drive for JRM's program in a part-time ride. Maybe in the 8 car, maybe in the 1 car. That could certainly be a possibility because I'm not sure he's going to get to run a cup race, but I think we all would love to see Padar Ward get that chance and opportunity to maybe make his NASCAR Cup Series debut because he's expressed interest. It could happen next year or it could happen in 2026. Who knows at this point? But I want to see McLaren come to NASCAR. I think it'd be really huge for the sport if something like that were to happen. And I think because McLaren, they've been successful in Formula One for years. You think about what Lando Norris is currently doing in F1 currently at the moment, all the success he's having right now. And Oscar Piastri's doing really good. And then you think about Padar Ward and the future of that team and where it's going. You've obviously got Nolan Siegel doing a great job. We could all see him come over and race in NASCAR. I think Nolan's a very talented driver, and he's kind of like Kyle Larson a little bit with the talent that he brings. He, of course, won a Le Mans earlier this year, that being Nolan Siegel, so we may see him get the chance and opportunity. But I think it's really cool to see that Zach Brown is interested in maybe bringing one of his cars over to run the Daytona 500. It'd be really awesome to see it happen and bring him into the sport. I think it'd be pretty fun, and I really hope in the near future we do get to see this happen where we get to see maybe McLaren find their way into NASCAR. I think it'd be really huge for the sport, and I think it'd bring a lot of success to the table for the motorsports world. There'll be a lot of great crossover, and honestly, I really hope it happens where McLaren comes into NASCAR in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're doing a little bit of a NASCAR silly season checkup. Now, earlier today, Jordan Bianchi put up a little bit of an update, silly season update on his own. The last time he had done one was only back in May, and he kind of talked about the remaining rides that are still available and kind of clear up some of the rumors that have been going on. He obviously mentioned Shane Van Gisbergen going full-time in the Cup Series in 2025 with Trackhouse. He also talked about the fact that Josh Berry is going to the Wood Brothers. Also talked a little bit about Austin Dillon, I believe. And he also talked about some of the other guys like Mark Truex Jr. retiring and Chase Briscoe going over. There were some very interesting things that he mentioned in his article. Let's first begin by talking about Corey LaJoie. Corey LaJoie, we know, will not be returning to Spire Motorsports in the 2025 season. Despite the fact he had a multi-year contract with the team to return, he will not be back with the team in 2025. So now the big question is, where is Corey LaJoie going to end up? Originally, it was rumored that he was going to be driving the 19 truck for McLaren Kligerman Racing. However, it is starting to sound like from what he and the conversations that he's been having, it sounds like Corey LaJoie might be having a little bit of trade with the driver we'll talk about here in just a second. It sounds like he's going to be driving the number 51 car for Ware Racing in 2025. Now, in my opinion, this is a downgrade from Justin Haley. I think Corey is a talented race car driver. I know I've criticized him a lot in recent months with some of the antics he's been doing on the racetrack, but I do think at the end of the day, Corey LaJoie does have talent. And with the RFK alliance they have, it could lead to a little bit of success. And Chris Lawson, in my opinion, is a pretty good crew chief that could be able to help. But I do think you're going to see a step back in performance for Corey. Now, I know Corey would love to have a top-tier ride, but I feel like Corey LaJoie is also one of these guys that kind of likes to be that underdog story. So I could definitely see him going here and bringing a little success to the table. This is a rumor that's been going around a lot. I think Corey could definitely end up here in 2025. The driver likely takes the 7 car is the current driver of the 51, Justin Haley. This has been one of the biggest kept secrets and biggest no-brainers at this point. Many people, including myself, do think that Justin Haley is going to the 7 car for Spire Motorsports. Pretty much you're going to have a driver swap between Corey LaJoie and Justin Haley next year, according to what's being reported by Jordan Bianchi. Look, a lot of teams really like him. And to the point where there are even rumors about Alex Bowman, who we'll get to in a second. There have been rumors about Alex Bowman going to Spire and then Justin Haley taking over the 48 car. Now, obviously, Justin Haley and Rodney Childers together, that is going to be a very dynamic pairing. I expect both those guys to be very, very successful going into 2025, having that speed, being super competitive. And I think while he may not perform as well as maybe Carson Hocevar, I think he's certainly going to do better than what Corey LaJoie has accomplished. I expect collectively, if Justin Haley does go to Spire, I think it'll be the best set of organizations ever for him. I think all 3 cars will be top 30 in the points, and maybe all 3 will be top 25 in the standings, because Michael Maddow, I think, is going to be pretty good next year and will be better than what Zane Smith's been doing. And I expect that car to get a lot better. So Justin Haley likely will be going over to Spire in 2025. Moving on to Zane Smith. There have been some talk and conversations about Zane Smith maybe not going to Front Row Motorsports, but it sounds more than likely at this point that Zane Smith will in fact be going to Front Row Motorsports in 2025. Zane and Front Row want to reunite. He had left Front Row after 2022. He had ran part-time with them in 2023. And then, of course, he had that opportunity to go over to Trackhouse Racing. Obviously, that's not happening with Shane Van Gisbergen going full-time and taking the 3rd Trackhouse seat. There, like I said, Kevin Harvick had brought up the potential possibility of him not going there. But I think even though Ford may be frustrated, you can't lose Zane Smith in the Cup Series. I think him going to Front Row and being teammates with Noah Gragson, and also Todd Gillan, that would be a great move. Plus, Zane and Noah are really good friends, and they've been hanging out a lot recently. So I do think that Zane Smith being part of this team will make a lot of sense. Moving on to Alex Bowman. It was confirmed earlier this week from Hendrick Motorsports, and Andrea Brimmer, who's basically the CEO of Ally, I believe, and runs that operation over there, she confirmed as well that Alex Bowman isn't leaving Hendrick Motorsports. There's been a rumor that's been going around a lot. We talk about it on the channel. I'm glad to see everyone's been pretty much clearing this rumor up in recent weeks, because I think Alex Bowman deserves to stay at Hendrick Motorsports. I think Alex has done a really good at Hendrick over the years. Yes, maybe not as good as William Byron, Chase Elliott, or Kyle Larson, but those 3 are extremely elite talents, and Alex Bowman is a pretty good talent. He's not on that same level, but he's still a good driver. So I certainly do think Alex Bowman deserves to stay at Hendrick Motorsports next year. Moving on to 2311 Racing. We know they're in talks to expand to a 3-car operation next year. However, we've already talked about this a couple times. 2311 Racing has not signed the charter agreement at this point. It is unknown if they are going to sign the charter agreement. If they do sign the charter agreement, they will be a 3-car team more than likely in 2025. It is expected that Riley Herbst will get that 3rd seat. There have been talk maybe about Corey Heim getting the seat next year, but I don't see that changing. I think you will end up seeing Riley Herbst in the seat, even though I personally would put Corey Heim behind the wheel of that car for next year. Now, Bubba Wallace did say his contract talk's a little on hold currently at the moment. If they do get this charter agreement signed, Bubba will sign a multi-year contract extension with 2311 Racing. And I still think more than likely that is going to end up happening, where Bubba will be part of that team next year. But it'll be very interesting to see how things play out with that. But Bubba is expected to be back with 2311 next year. Moving on to Kaulig Racing. Talks about the 31 car. It sounds like Daniel Hemrick will not be back with Kaulig Racing at all in 2025. We know AJ Allmendinger is driving a 16 car once again in 2025. So the big question going around is who is going to take over the 31 if Hemrick doesn't return. It sounds like Ty Dillon's the favorite. Look, Ty Dillon, in my opinion, being a Cup Series car full-time, I'm not the biggest fan of this move. But you got to remember, Ty Dillon brings some money. And I feel like being in a Cup car also does make a little sense, too, considering he has definitely struggled in the NASCAR Truck Series with Rackley. Matt DiBenedetto performed way better in that truck. So I think Ty Dillon moving up full-time to Cup to 31, considering the relationship that Kaulig and Ty have had in the past, it does make a lot of sense. It sounds like that very likely will more than likely, nonetheless, end up happening next year. And finally, let's talk about RFK Racing. We've talked about this on the channel quite a few times recently, but it sounds more than less that RFK Racing is going to expand to a 3-car operation next year. And it sounds more than likely that the driver will be Ryan Preece. It was mentioned in the article that they feel like Ryan Preece has not been given a fair shake in a Cup Series car. And I 100% agree with The Athletic on this. Ryan Preece has not been given a fair shake in Cup. The first time he drove in Cup, he drove for JTD Doherty Racing. That wasn't a great organization back then, and they're still not a great organization to this day. Then he went over to Stewart Haas Racing in 2023, and he joined the organization at the worst time. That season, SHR went winless for the first time, and only one car made the playoffs. Then in 2024, Ryan Preece has been the worst driver at the team, but he's not been that awful, all things considered. I think, and also think about the Kroger partnership. Kroger really likes Ryan Preece, and I think him getting a chance and an opportunity to work with Kroger next year absolutely makes a ton and a lot of sense. So I do think going into next year, you'll see Ryan Preece at RFK, and I think he'll do pretty solid. We didn't think Chris Buescher was going to do much at RFK when he went over there, and look what Chris has done. 5 wins in the last 3 seasons, been pretty, or 4 or 5 wins in the last 3 years. He's been really, really good, and I think that Chris Buescher, and especially with the Kroger's partnership and working there, I think that will be a really good pairing. Also, didn't mention anything about Harrison Burton. It sounds like he's going to be in Xfinity with AM Racing potentially next year. That's rumor that I have heard. Also, drivers like Haley Deegan are not signed for next year. I don't know what she's doing at this point. And there's other drivers, maybe Carlos Kerwish coming out of retirement, who could somehow find a way to make moves in the future. But it's going to be very interesting to see how the rest of the silly season plays out. But it sounds like there's some pretty big moves coming down the pipeline, and everything is kind of up in the air to kind of figure out what's going on. I think there's a lot of big moves coming down the future. I think most of these rides will probably be signed more than less by the end of this month, and some moves are about to start happening very, very soon. So, that is going over today's NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys watching. Please subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on so you know if I win a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support on Patreon as well. List goes below that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's episode. You think Corey LaJoie ends up at Rick Ware? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And do you think Ryan Preece truly ends up at RFK? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I don't think there's any more videos dropping today on the channel. Tomorrow we're going to have multiple videos dropping. We're obviously going to have the reactions to Cup Series qualifying. If SVG wins pole for Xfinity, we'll have a video on that. We'll have Xfinity race review unless SVG goes to victory lane. Sunday we're going to have a lot of content dropping as well. And then going into next week, we'll be racing at Bristol to decide who makes it into the round of 12. Going to be really exciting and fun stuff to cover that stuff coming up. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.